I'm Christina, 31, female. I live in a small apartment above a flower shop, and the scent of roses and lily of the valley is the first thing I wake up to every morning. I'm a pastry chef, which means my life is a whirlwind of flour, sugar, and the relentless pursuit of the perfect crumb. It's a modest life, one built on passion rather than profit, but it's mine. At least it was until my millionaire brother offered me a dream that turned into my worst nightmare. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The annual family barbecue in July was always a slightly tense affair. It was held at my parents' comfortable but decidedly middle-class home, a fact that seemed to both amuse and irritate my older brother, David. He and his wife, Jessica, would arrive in a car that cost more than my parents' house, dressed in clothes that whispered wealth from every thread. David, an investment banker with a shark's smile, had always measured the world in dollars and cents. I, on the other hand, measured it in cups and grams. This year, David was in a particularly magnanimous mood. He stood by the grill, a cold beer in his hand, holding court as he always did. He talked about market trends, a recent trip to Monaco, and the absurdity of property taxes. I was trying to explain the delicate chemistry of a perfect macaron to my aunt when David clapped his hands together, silencing the chatter. Big announcement, everyone. He boomed, all eyes turned to him. Jessica stood beside him, a placid, curated smile on her face. As you all know, he continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction. Chrissy here is the artist of the family, working so hard, chasing her dreams. There was a faint trace of condescension in his voice, as if my dream was a charming but ultimately pointless hobby. But an artist needs a proper studio, a place to thrive, that little apartment of hers. Well, it's not cutting it. I felt a flush of embarrassment creep up my neck. My apartment was small, yes, but it was my sanctuary. I didn't need him broadcasting its inadequacies to our entire extended family. So, David said, his smile widening, I've decided to do something about it. I recently acquired a property out by Silver Lake. A beautiful little house needs some work, but it's got a huge kitchen and a gorgeous view. A perfect place for you to set up your little cake business, Chrissy. He paused for dramatic effect. It's yours, a gift. A collective gasp went through the yard. My mom's eyes filled with tears. My dad slapped David on the back, beaming with pride. I was speechless. A house. A whole house. It was a lifeline I'd never even dared to dream of. My bakery business was fledgling, struggling to take off, and the biggest hurdle was my lack of space. This gift wasn't just a house, it was a future. David, I don't know what to say. I stammered, my heart pounding. I can't accept that. It's too much. Nonsense, he said, waving a dismissive hand. It's an investment I was going to sit on anyway. Better it goes to family. Think of it as an early inheritance, but from me to you, all I want is to see my little sister succeed. Jessica chimed in, her voice smooth as silk. We're just so happy we can help, Christina. We know how much this means to you. Over the next week, it was a blur. David was efficient, I'll give him that. He had a stack of papers for me to sign, just the standard deed transfer and some liability forms. He explained breezily over coffee. My lawyer, Tom, drew them up. It's all boilerplate stuff. Just signs here, here, and here. I stared at the dense pages of legal text. It was intimidating. I should have read them. I know that now. I should have taken them to a lawyer, had someone look them over. But in that moment, I was blinded by gratitude and trust. This was my brother, my own flesh and blood. He was giving me a house, a chance to build my life. To question him felt deeply ungrateful, like looking a gift horse in the mouth and then counting its teeth. So, with a trusting smile and a hand that trembled slightly, I signed where he pointed. I hugged him tightly, tears in my eyes, telling him he had changed my life. He just smiled that cool, confident smile and said, I know. That's what family is for. 2 weeks later, I was holding the keys to my very own lake house, unaware that I had just signed away my peace of mind. The first month at the lake house was pure bliss. It was a charming, rustic A-frame with a large deck overlooking the water. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the kitchen. It was enormous, with a massive island in the center and enough counter space to handle a dozen wedding cake orders at once. I spent every waking moment cleaning, painting, and turning it into a home. I sketched out designs for my new pastry studio, imagining the clients I would host and the beautiful creations I would make. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I could finally breathe. My future felt solid, tangible, and bright. The little oddities began subtly. A piece of mail arrived, not addressed to me or to David, but to an entity called Silver Lake Holdings LLC. I figured it was just some old mail and tossed it aside. Then, a few weeks later, a man in a polo shirt with a landscaping company logo knocked on my door. "Hi, I'm just here for the quarterly lawn maintenance check." He said cheerfully, "Just need to check the sprinklers. The owner likes us to be thorough." "Oh, hi," I said, confused. "I'm the owner, Christina. I didn't schedule any maintenance." He frowned, pulling out his tablet. Our work order is for Silver Lake Holdings. They own a bunch of properties we manage in the area." I felt a prickle of unease. "My brother gave me the house. Maybe the name hasn't been updated in your system yet." "Could be," the man said with a shrug and went about his work. I called David that evening. "Hey, just a weird question. I've been getting mail for a company called Silver Lake Holdings, and the lawn guy had that name down as the owner. Did you forget to update something?" There was a brief pause on his end. "Oh, don't worry about it," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "The house is held in an LLC for tax purposes. It's just a legal shield, protects the asset. It's complicated financial stuff. You wouldn't get it. The house is yours, Chrissy. That's all you need to know." His explanation, meant to be comforting, had the opposite effect. The asset, he didn't call it a home. He called it an asset, but I pushed the thought away. I was being paranoid. He was a businessman. Of course he thought in those terms. I was letting my own insecurities color the situation. He had given me a house. I needed to stop being so suspicious. A month later, Jessica called. Her tone was bubbly, but there was an edge to it I couldn't quite place. "Chrissy, darling, how are you settling in? We were just talking about you." "I'm great, Jessica. The place is really coming together. I'm almost ready to start taking local orders." "That's wonderful," she gushed. "David was just saying what a fantastic investment the property is turning out to be. The whole area is booming. The property value has gone up nearly 15% in the last 3 months alone. Isn't that incredible? He's so smart." Again, that word. "Investment. A gift isn't an investment. An investment is something you expect a return on." "Oh, wow," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "That's great news." "It is, anyway. We just wanted to see how you were. Talk soon." She hung up. I stood in my beautiful new kitchen, staring out at the serene lake, but the water no longer looked peaceful. It looked cold and deep. The conversation replayed in my head. Protects the asset. A fantastic investment. The documents I'd signed flashed in my mind's eye. Pages of dense text I hadn't bothered to read. A cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of my stomach. The house was starting to feel less like a home and more like a cage, one whose bars were invisible but closing in around me. The strings attached to my brother's favor were beginning to tighten, and I was terrified to find out what would happen when they were finally pulled taut. The crisp autumn air had begun to settle over the lake, painting the trees in brilliant shades of red and gold. I was finally hitting my stride. I'd converted the oversized garage into a licensed commercial kitchen, separate from my personal space, and had landed a standing weekly order with a popular local cafe. My dream was slowly, painstakingly, becoming a reality. The unease I'd felt over the summer had faded, replaced by the sheer busyness of building a life. I'd convinced myself I was overthinking things, that my brother, for all his flaws, wouldn't betray me so fundamentally. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I came back from a delivery to find a certified mail slip taped to my front door. I drove to the post office with a sense of foreboding, my hands clammy on the steering wheel. The clerk handed me a stiff, important-looking envelope. The return address wasn't from a person, but from a law firm I didn't recognize. I sat in my car and tore it open. The language was cold, formal, and utterly devastating. It wasn't a traditional eviction notice, which only added to the chilling effect. It was a notice of lease termination. It stated that pursuant to Section 4B of the Residential Occupancy Agreement I had signed on July 15th, the owner, Silver Lake Holdings, LLC, was exercising its right to terminate the agreement without cause. I had 30 days to vacate the premises. The property was being listed for sale. Lease termination, occupancy agreement. The words swam before my eyes. This couldn't be right. It was a gift. I owned this house. I didn't have a lease. My first call was to David. I was hyperventilating, barely able to get the words out. "David, I got a letter, a legal notice. It says I have to leave the house in 30 days. It says I have a lease. What is going on?" There was no warmth in his voice. No concern, only a sigh of weary impatience, as if I were a tedious problem he had to manage. "Christina, calm down. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal, I shrieked, my voice cracking. It says I'm being kicked out of my home, the home you gave me. I didn't give it to you. He said, his tone turning sharp and clinical. That's not how the world works. I let you live there, rent-free, in a property I was planning to flip. It was a temporary arrangement to help you get on your feet. You've had 5 months, now the market is peaking, and it's the right time to sell. It's just business. The floor dropped out from under me. I felt dizzy, sick. Business? You told me it was a gift. You told the whole family it was a gift. I signed papers you said were for a deed transfer. The papers you signed were a rental agreement, he said coldly. A very generous one, I might add. It protected you, and it protected my asset. If you had bothered to read it, you would have known the terms. This is on you, Christina. You're being incredibly ungrateful. I gave you a 5-month vacation in $1 million home, and this is the thanks I get. I was choking on his words, on the sheer, calculated cruelty of it all. The family barbecue, the grand announcement, the tears in my mother's eyes. It was all a performance. He had used me. He had used our family's love and trust as props in his little show. I wasn't his sister. I was a placeholder, a house sitter for his investment portfolio. How could you? I whispered, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a hollow, aching grief. You're my brother. And I've been a very good brother. He snapped. Now, you need to be an adult about this. The notice is firm. You have 30 days. A realtor will be in touch to schedule viewings. Then he hung up. I sat there in the post office parking lot, the legal notice clutched in my hand, the world dissolving into a blur of tears. He hadn't just lied to me. He had systematically dismantled my dream, using my own hope as the demolition tool. He hadn't just taken away a house. He had stolen my faith in the one person I thought I could always count on. The notice wasn't just paper and ink. It was a declaration of war. And in that moment of absolute devastation, a tiny, cold spark of anger began to glow within the wreckage of my heart. He thought this was over. He thought I would just pack my bags and disappear. He was about to find out how wrong he was. For 2 days, I was paralyzed. I walked through the rooms of the house, my house, touching the walls I'd painted, staring at the kitchen where my future was supposed to be born. Every corner was a monument to my own foolishness. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But on the 3rd day, the grief began to curdle into a hard, cold rage. He was not going to get away with this. My first and only call was to Sarah, my best friend since kindergarten. Sarah was a paralegal, and her mind worked with the kind of sharp, methodical precision that mine, lost in clouds of meringue and ganache, could never muster. I met her at a coffee shop, my hands shaking as I pushed the legal notice and a copy of the documents I had signed across the table. He told me it was a deed transfer. I said, my voice hoarse, I trusted him. Sarah didn't say, I told you so. Though she'd always been wary of David's slick charm, she simply put on her reading glasses and began to meticulously scan the pages. She was silent for a long time, her lips pursed in concentration. Finally, she looked up, her expression grim. Chrissy, this is bad. He was clever. This isn't a standard lease. It's a fixed-term occupancy agreement with the ownership held by an LLC. The language is intentionally dense. He buried the termination clause deep in a section about property maintenance. He counted on you not reading it. So there's nothing I can do, I asked, my heart sinking. It's all legal. Technically, the contract itself might be enforceable, she said slowly. But that doesn't mean what he did was legal. There's a concept called fraudulent misrepresentation. He intentionally deceived you into signing something under false pretenses. That's a much stronger angle. Sarah's eyes gleamed with a righteous fire I knew well. When she got locked onto a problem, she was relentless. First things first, she said, tapping the document. Let's find out everything we can about Silver Lake Holdings, LLC. We spent the next week in a deep dive that felt like something out of a movie. Sarah used her access to legal databases, and I became an expert in public records searches. The first layer was easy to peel back. David was listed as the sole managing member of the LLC, but Sarah encouraged me to dig deeper. A guy like this doesn't just do something this elaborate once, she said. This feels practiced. She was right. Silver Lake Holdings, LLC was just one piece of a much larger, uglier puzzle. We found 2 other LLC registered under David's name, each linked to a single property. We cross-referenced the property addresses with public sale records. A pattern emerged. David would buy a property in an up-and-coming area, offer it to a distant relative or an old family friend under the guise of a favor or a rent, to own opportunity. He'd get them to live there, often having them perform repairs and upgrades at their own expense, which improved the property value. Then, just as they were getting settled, he would invoke a hidden clause in a convoluted agreement they'd signed and sell the property out from under them, pocketing a tidy profit. The final, sickening discovery came when we found a record connected to our own family. A property owned by another of his LLC had been rented to our cousin Leo a few years ago. Leo had fallen on hard times, and David had helped him out. 6 months later, Leo was forced to move, having spent his last few $1,000s fixing up the plumbing, only for David to sell the place for a $60,000 profit. Leo had been so ashamed, so humiliated by his own naivety, that he had never told anyone the full story, simply saying that the arrangement hadn't worked out. I felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't just a cruel act directed at me. This was who my brother was. He was a predator who used the language of family and generosity as his camouflage. He preyed on people who trusted him, exploiting their hope. Exploiting their hope and their financial vulnerability for his own gain. I looked at Sarah across the mountain of paperwork on her dining table. The sadness was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. He's not just taking my house, Sarah. He's been doing this for years. He's hurting people. He's hurting our family. Sarah nodded, her expression serious. So what are we going to do about it? He built his career on his reputation. I said, a plan starting to form in my mind, the ingredients coming together like a complex recipe. He's the generous son, the family man. He loves playing that part, especially at Thanksgiving. A slow smile spread across Sarah's face. Thanksgiving is in 3 weeks, I know. I said, my voice low and steady, and this year I'm in charge of dessert. A legal battle would drain me emotionally and financially, which was exactly what David would expect. He'd assume I'd either crumble and leave, or try to sue him, where he could bury me in legal fees with his army of corporate lawyers. My battlefield couldn't be the courtroom. It had to be somewhere he was vulnerable, somewhere his carefully constructed image was everything. It had to be the family Thanksgiving dinner. My plan had several layers, just like the elaborate cake I was already designing in my head. The first layer was a strategic feint. With Sarah's help, we drafted the most intimidating legal letter imaginable. It didn't focus on the occupancy agreement. Instead, it laid out a clear case for fraudulent misrepresentation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Sarah used her sharpest legal language, but the real power of the letter was in the appendix. We attached a meticulously organized summary of our findings, a list of his LLC, the addresses of the properties, the names of the people he'd manipulated, including our cousin Leo, and a timeline of his predatory pattern. It was a formal accusation not just of one lie, but of a calculated history of deceit. This will spook him, Sarah said as she printed it. He'll see that you know about his other deals. He values his reputation more than anything. The last thing he wants is for this to become a public record in a lawsuit. We sent the letter to his lawyer, timing it to arrive exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving. It wasn't a demand for the house, it was a warning shot. We were letting him know that we had the ammunition to destroy his reputation. The second, more important layer of the plan was the Thanksgiving confrontation itself. Our family's Thanksgiving was a sacred tradition, hosted by my parents. It was a huge affair with aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was also David's favorite stage. He would always sit at the head of the table opposite my father, carving the turkey, playing the part of the successful, benevolent patriarch on training. This year, I was going to rewrite the script. For the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into my work with a feverish intensity. I baked from sunrise to sunset, not just for my cafe orders, but for the masterpiece of my revenge. I designed a magnificent 4-tiered cake. It looked like a celebration, a beautiful confection of white fondant, delicate sugar flowers, and intricate piping. But its beauty was a facade, just like my brother. Each tier represented a part of his betrayal. The bottom tier, the foundation, was a dense, dark chocolate cake with a bitter espresso filling. This represented the LLC, the dark, hidden foundation of his lies. The second tier was a lemon sponge with a sour curd, for the bitter, sour taste of his fake generosity. The third tier was a red velvet, the color of the anger and heartbreak he had caused. The top tier, small and deceptively simple, was a vanilla bean cake, pure and white, representing the innocent trust I had placed in him, which he had so casually destroyed. Alongside the cake, I prepared my evidence. I didn't want to just make accusations. I wanted to provide undeniable proof. For each family member who would be present, I created a simple, discreet folder. Inside each one was a one-page summary of David's scheme, a copy of the key page from my occupancy agreement, with the termination clause highlighted, and a short, anonymized account of what had happened to Cousin Leo. I wanted them to hold the proof in their own hands. The day before Thanksgiving, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a journalist from the local paper's business section. "Hi, is this Christina?" the woman asked. I got an anonymous tip about some potentially predatory real estate practices involving a local investment banker, David Miller. The tip suggested I might want to pay attention to any family drama that unfolds over the holiday. Any comment? I smiled. Sarah's friend who worked at the paper had come through. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said sweetly, "but I am baking a very special cake for my family's Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow." I gave her my parents' address. "You might find the story has many layers." I hung up, my heart hammering in my chest. All the pieces were in place. The oven was preheated. The trap was set. All that was left was to serve him his just desserts. The air in my parents' house was thick with the comforting smells of roast turkey and cinnamon. Laughter echoed from the living room as I carried the cake in from my car, my hands surprisingly steady. I placed it on the sideboard in the dining room, a silent, four-tiered promise of the storm to come. Dinner was a masterclass in denial. David, having received the letter from his lawyer, was clearly on edge, but he hid it well. He was louder than usual, his laughter a little too forced. He regaled everyone with a story about a business rival's downfall, framing it as a tale of corporate justice. He kept shooting me tense, questioning glances across the table, but I just smiled serenely and passed the mashed potatoes. Jessica was a statue of perfect composure, but her eyes, which normally scanned the room with an air of detached superiority, were fixed on her husband. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. Finally, the plates were cleared, and my mom announced time for dessert. Chrissy made a special cake this year. This was my cue. I stood up and walked over to the cake. All eyes were on me as I picked up the silver cake server. "I did," I said, my voice clear and calm, carrying across the room. "This cake is very special. I call it the House of Cards, and I made it for you, David." A confused silence fell over the table. David's smile froze on his face. "I placed the server against the bottom tier. You see, this first layer, this dark, bitter chocolate, represents the foundation of your generosity. It's called Silver Lake Holdings LLC, but it also has other names like Summit Property Group and Apex Ventures. It's the foundation you build all your favors on." My cousin Michael, who was closest to the folders I had placed on a nearby table, looked at me with wide eyes. I gave him a slight nod. He understood. He stood up and began passing the folders to each family member. "Christina thought you might want to see the recipe," he said, his voice laced with sudden gravity. David shot to his feet. "Christina, what is the meaning of this? This is a family dinner. Don't be dramatic." I ignored him, moving the server up to the second tier. "This lemon layer is for the sour taste of the deal. It represents the occupancy agreement you had me sign. The one you told me was a deed transfer. The one with the hidden clause that allows you to kick me out of my home with 30 days' notice so you can flip your asset." Whispers erupted around the table as people opened their folders. My parents looked utterly bewildered, staring from the paper to David, then to me. My Uncle Robert, a retired lawyer, was reading the document with a thunderous expression on his face. "And this layer," I continued, my voice gaining strength as I indicated the red velvet, "is for Cousin Leo. Remember him, David. You helped him out a few years ago. You let him spend his savings fixing up one of your properties right before you sold it out from under him. He was too ashamed to tell anyone. But it's all here in the records." Leo's mom, my Aunt Carol, let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth as she looked at her husband. The pieces were clicking into place all around the room. David's face was pale, then flushed with rage. "This is slander. She's hysterical because she's being ungrateful. I gave her a place to live. You gave me nothing." I finally shouted, the raw emotion breaking through my composure. "You used me. You used all of us. You used this family, this dinner, this whole performance of being a good son and brother to build an image, while behind our backs you prey on anyone who trusts you. You build your fortune on the humiliation of your own family." Uncle Robert finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "The fraudulent misrepresentation alone is a slam. Dunk case, David, not to mention the pattern of behavior. This is predatory. It is disgusting. My mom was openly crying now, my dad looking at his son with an expression of profound, shattering disappointment. The image David had spent a lifetime crafting had been demolished in under 5 minutes. He stood there, exposed and stripped of all his manufactured charm, revealed as nothing more than a petty, greedy man. Jessica grabbed his arm, her face a mask of horror, and hissed, "David, let's go." He stared at me one last time, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it chilled me to the bone. Then, without another word, they turned and walked out, the front door slamming shut behind them, leaving a deafening silence in their wake. I stood there, knife in hand, beside my beautiful uneaten cake, the victor in a war I had never wanted to fight. The aftermath of that Thanksgiving was like a quiet, devastating earthquake. The initial shockwave of David's exit gave way to a series of tremors that permanently altered the landscape of our family. The dinner party broke up in hushed, somber clusters. My parents were heartbroken, struggling to reconcile the son they thought they knew with the man I had exposed. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, aunts apologizing for not seeing it, uncles offering legal support, and my cousin Leo, who called me, his voice thick with emotion, to thank me for telling the truth he never could. The most significant call came on Monday morning. It was from David's lawyer, not David himself. The tone was no longer dismissive, it was clipped and desperate. "My client is prepared to find an amicable resolution," the lawyer said. Sarah sat beside me on speakerphone, cool as a cucumber. "Amicable," she replied. "Your client fraudulently misrepresented a legal document to his own sister to trick her into acting as an unpaid property manager before he flipped it for a profit. Where is the amicable part of that?" There was a sputtering on the other end. "He is willing to transfer the deed of the Silver Lake property to a mess. Miller, free and clear, with all expediency." I felt a surge of triumph, but I wasn't done. The house was only part of it. This was about justice. I looked at Sarah and nodded. "That's a good start." I said into the phone, "But it's not enough. I have one more condition." I told him about another one of the deals we had uncovered, involving an elderly family friend David had tricked with a confusing rent. "To own scheme, he will make that person whole," I stated. "He will pay back the money they spent on renovations and sell them the property for the original price he quoted them, before he tried to change the terms. We have the emails. We want a legally binding agreement, for both my deed and for that restitution." The lawyer protested, but there was no fire in it. David's back was against the wall. A potential lawsuit detailing his pattern of behavior, combined with the story the local journalist was now eagerly pursuing, would be catastrophic for his career. He had built his reputation on being a trustworthy financial wizard. The revelation that he scammed his own family would be poison. He had no choice. 2 weeks later, I signed the final papers. This time, I read every single word. The lake house was mine, truly, unconditionally mine. David became a ghost in our family. He and Jessica didn't come to Christmas that year. My parents' attempts to mediate were met with angry accusations and blame. He saw me not as a sister who had stood up for herself, but as the saboteur who had ruined his life. In truth, he had ruined it himself. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see. Life at the lake house changed. The lingering sense of dread was replaced by a profound sense of peace and ownership. I threw myself into my business with a newfound confidence. The story, in a twisted way, became good for business. The local paper eventually ran a softened version of the events, a human interest piece about a local pastry chef who fought for her dream home. Orders poured in. I am writing this from my kitchen table, looking out at the calm blue water. The garage has been fully transformed into the Lake House Bakery, and I'm booked with wedding cake consultations for the next 6 months. I lost a brother that Thanksgiving. There is a real grief in that, a sadness for the relationship I thought we had. But in his place, I found something far more valuable, my own strength. I learned that my voice is powerful, that trust should be earned, not given freely, and that the sweetest victories are the ones you fight for yourself. I no longer live in a house of cards. I live in a home built on a foundation of resilience, a home I saved on my own terms.